Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to explore a truly fascinating intersection. We're looking at exactly where ancient Mesoamerican traditions collide perfectly with modern neurochemistry. Now, if you've ever wondered if the historical rituals surrounding plant medicines were, just symbolic ceremonies, or if there was actual, measurable science behind them, well, you are in for a serious treat. Today, we're decoding the precise pharmacology of combining Theobroma cacao with psilocybin.
To really understand this, we've got to look back. The Aztecs had very specific names for these medicines. They called cacao Yolotl Etzli, which translates beautifully to the blood of the heart, and they called psilocybin mushrooms Tionanacatl, meaning the flesh of the gods. But the absolutely crucial point here is that they didn't just casually consume these sacraments together because they tasted good. No way. This was a deliberate, consistent pairing. It was a highly formalized protocol. And what's just amazing is that modern science is finally uncovering the deep neurochemical reasons why this combination is so incredibly powerful.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're starting with the ancient Mesoamerican pairing. Then we'll look at the four acute mechanisms: theobromine, anandamide, PEA, and MAO inhibition. After that, we'll hit the long-term fifth mechanism, which is neuroplasticity, and finally, we'll tie the whole shebang together with the modern synergy protocol.
Section 1. The Ancient Mesoamerican Pairing.
Now, this pairing actually predates modern Western pharmacology by over 1,000 years. It's so easy to look at historical practices and just kind of dismiss them as mere cultural artifacts, but the pairing of cacao and psilocybin, that was a convergent tradition. It was developed independently across the Aztec, Maya, and Mixtec cultures. And sure, these civilizations didn't exactly have fMRI machines lying around, but they had thousands of years of systematic observational trial and error. They paid close attention to the outcomes. In fact, surviving Codex illustrations show highly formalized pre-session cacao protocols. So this wasn't just some random pairing. It was a carefully refined technology.
Moving right along to Section 2. Theobromine, the vasodilator.
Let's get into the specific pharmacology, starting with cacao's primary alkaloid, which makes up about 1 to 3% of its dry weight. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between ceremonial cacao and, say, your morning cup of coffee. Theobromine is in the exact same chemical class as caffeine, but it behaves completely differently in your body. While caffeine produces vasoconstriction, which basically means it narrows your blood vessels and triggers that jittery sympathetic nervous system activation, theobromine produces vasodilation. It literally widens your blood vessels. This increases cerebral blood flow and produces a very real physical sensation of somatic warmth. So when traditional practitioners talk about cacao opening the heart, they're not just using mystical poetry. It's the literal, somatic experience of peripheral vasodilation. Your body feels warm, your chest feels open, and your nervous system is essentially signaling to your brain, hey, we're safe.
So, why does this matter so much for psilocybin?
Well, because a brain on psilocybin is working in absolute overdrive. The activation of those 5-HT2A receptors in the prefrontal cortex, plus the massive cross-network communication happening, it requires a huge amount of glucose and oxygen. Theobromine steps right in and provides the vascular capacity, think of it as widening the biological highways, to deliver exactly what the brain needs to meet that extreme metabolic demand.
Section 3. Anandamide, the bliss molecule.
Let's explore the second major mechanism, which is how cacao interacts directly with our brain's endogenous cannabinoid system to manage anxiety. You've probably heard of anandamide. It's actually named after the Sanskrit word for bliss, and it's our brain's natural, internally produced cannabinoid. Normally, this bliss molecule gets wiped out super quickly by a cleanup enzyme called FAH. You can kind of think of FAH as a biological vacuum cleaner. But here is the absolute genius of cacao. It doesn't just contain a little bit of its own anandamide. It contains structural analogs called N-acyl-ethanylaminoins, and these molecules effectively block that FAH cleanup enzyme. By inhibiting the biological vacuum that destroys your bliss molecules, cacao dramatically extends an anandamide's active window in the brain. Now, this sustained endocannabinoid tone is absolutely crucial during a session. We know that one of the biggest risks to a therapeutic outcome with psilocybin is anxiety or panic, particularly when the ego structure begins to dissolve. When the brain senses a loss of self, the amygdala can trigger a severe fear response. By artificially extending that bliss state, cacao creates a very real neurochemical safety net. It acts as an emotional buffer against panic, which allows the user to navigate the dissolution of the ego with a profound sense of safety.
Section 4. PEA
and MAOI inhibition.
Okay, let's look at two more synergistic compounds working in tandem here to amplify and smooth out the entire session. The third compound is PEA, or phenylethylamine. It gets reductively called the love molecule a lot, but actually, scratch that. Pharmacologically, it's an attention modulator. It triggers a rapid release of dopamine and norepinephrine. And what this does is heighten your emotional arousal and attention. During a psilocybin session, your brain is encountering all sorts of novel perceptions and thoughts, right? Well, PEA steps in and tags those new perceptions with profound significance. It essentially tells the brain, hey, this is really important, remember this. By elevating the significance of the experience, PEA determines what actually gets encoded into your long-term memory, massively amplifying the long-term integration of those therapeutic insights.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what ties it all together, the fourth mechanism, MAO inhibition. Our brains have enzymes called monoamine oxidases, or MAOs, which clean up neurotransmitters, including PEA and psilocin. Cacao happens to contain mild, reversible MAO inhibitors, and this does two incredible things. First, it slows down the breakdown of that PEA we just talked about, extending that heightened state of significance. Second, it gently slows down the metabolism of the psilocin itself. So instead of a sharp, potentially anxiety-inducing peak followed by a sudden drop, the MAO inhibitors in cacao create this beautifully smoothed-out, gradual therapeutic curve.
Let's do a really quick recap of these four acute synergistic compounds. We've got theobromine acting as a vasodilator to provide that somatic safety. We've got anandamide and FAH inhibition working to reduce amygdala fear and prevent panic. We have PEA releasing catecholamines to amplify attention and tag insights with significance. And we have mild MAO inhibitors slowing the enzymes down to elegantly smooth out the entire experience curve. Honestly, it is a perfectly balanced neurochemical symphony.
Section 5. Neuroplasticity, the fifth mechanism.
Moving from the immediate session to long-term integration, we need to remember what psilocybin actually does to the brain's structure. Research shows that psilocybin triggers a massive acute neuroplasticity response, specifically a 12 times increase in dendritic spine density. Just imagine psilocybin essentially opening up a massive construction window in your brain, where entirely new neural pathways can be laid down.
But you need raw materials for that construction, right? This is where cacao comes right back into the picture. Daily intake of cacao flavanols, specifically epicatechin, provides an 18% increase in serum BDNF levels. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's essentially Miracle-Gro for your brain. By consuming cacao in the days and weeks following a session, you are literally feeding the exact same neuroplasticity pathways that the psilocybin just opened. You are providing the biological scaffolding needed to make those new neural connections permanent.
Section 6. The Modern Synergy Protocol.
So how do we actually apply all of this? Well, here is what the actionable, science-backed protocol looks like chronologically. At T-minus 45 minutes, you consume a ceremonial dose, which is about 35 to 45 grams of warm cacao. Because theobromine has a 6 to 10 hour half-life, this perfectly primes your system with vasodilation and FAH inhibition right as the session begins. Then, from hours 0 to 6, the psilocybin is administered into a completely neurochemically buffered system. The brain has the blood flow it needs, the amygdala is buffered against fear, and those key insights are being tagged for significance. Finally, during the integration phase, from 24 hours up to 30 days later, you maintain a daily dose of about 15 to 25 grams of cacao to provide the BDNF support needed for synaptogenesis, totally locking in those structural brain changes.
If there's one absolute takeaway from this explainer, it's this. Cacao is not some alternative medicine add-on. It's definitely not just a flavoring to mask the taste of the mushrooms. It is measurable compound pharmacology. Cacao provides the essential vascular and emotional infrastructure that transforms a raw psychedelic experience into a durable, safe, and highly effective therapeutic intervention.
You know, the Aztecs understood this experiential truth centuries ago, and modern science is finally confirming the underlying pharmacology, which leaves us with a truly profound thought to end on. If it took us a whole millennium to finally catch up and prove the measurable science behind this ancient pairing, what other ancestral traditions is modern science just waiting to rediscover? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.